Good Friday. Welcome into Big Talk College Sports with the Midwest perspective, blue collar and blue blood. I am Sam Sprunger, and as always, Tony Hollinsworth to my left, stage left. Tony,
Yes.
how are we?
Living a dream, not feeling the greatest with the weather and the sickness
dream,
and whatnot.
A
dream, because it may be somebody else's dream. I don't know if it's my dream yet, but we'll see. I like this dream though. This dream is great because I get to believe, and obviously we get to talk in college men's basketball and whatnot.
We're gonna
football season's officially over.
We do have a football topic, but that's gonna be the back burner at the end of the show if we've got time, if we can squeeze it in. But we're gonna talk because we're in the throes of the Big Ten basketball season, halfway through the conference season, Tony. And right now, Michigan State doesn't show like they're going to slow down at all. They've won 13 straight. They're 9-0 in the Big Ten. Halfway through the Big Ten season, they're a game up on Purdue, and only a game because they're they've got two less. I guess the way it works is I guess they're a game and a half ahead of Purdue because Purdue's played 10 games and lost 2. But Tony, Sparty's looking pretty good.
Sparty is looking good. I mean, I'm not going to say they necessarily have easy opponents coming up with USC and UCLA. I mean, I think to me, USC maybe a little bit of path, but they're not exactly being slouches in the Big Ten right now. They're sitting there at 4-5, so they're just under 500, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, they're still right in the thick of it as far as, heck, you even look at the Oregon Ducks as far as the hot start they got off to. They're only sitting at 5-4 in the conference right now. So they're not too far off. And then UCLA also right near there as far as being 6-4. So little couple back-to-back stints just basically staying in Los Angeles before then they get to host Oregon at the Breslin Center. So not too far bad as far as schedules go, and they do have the advantage of at least getting a couple decent home games. And when they do have to face Purdue for the one and only time this season, they get to face it in the Breslin Center too, so they get a little bit of a break on that. It is interesting though to kind of see Michigan State to where this at. We haven't seen a Michigan State team this good since that 2018 and 2019 team. If I remember correctly, made it to the Final Four that year, if I remember correctly.
Believe you're correct. Yeah, this is and not that we didn't anticipate Michigan State being good. We really did anticipate them being one of the top teams, but the way that kind of things went into the preseason voting, the voters kind of missed on 2 of the 3 that they had in the top of the conference in the preseason. They had Purdue, IU, and UCLA were their top 3. So far right now, the only one that we're seeing that actually is holding true to that is Purdue. But it was never a thought that Michigan State wasn't gonna be good. We just thought, or people just thought that those 3 teams would be the ones that would stand out as the front runners. And UCLA's 6-4 overall in the Big Ten. IU's at 5-5. Purdue's at 8-2, but that's not 9-0 either.
Right. And saying, can we do a couple other shout outs to the teams in the Big Ten that have the letter M in their logo with both Maryland and Michigan? I mean, I know we kind of talked about it, and we talked about, a couple weeks ago about, is Michigan potentially frauds or not? And I still don't necessarily trust them to, necessarily win the Big Ten or maybe even do like a deep playoff run. I mean, they're sitting there at 7-2. They're 15-5 overall. They're one of only 2 teams undefeated at home. The other one being the other team up in Michigan. Michigan State's 11-0. And then the other team that has probably the most impressive, Maryland, has been on an absolute hot streak. They're 13-1 at home. Their only loss at home was against number 15 Marquette early in the season, and they only lost by 4. Maryland's on a bit of a hot streak. They beat Nebraska. They beat number 17 Illinois in Champaign
by 21.
And then they hosted number 17 Wisconsin, and they beat them by 8. So I mean, Maryland's, and it's funny. Like I said, last couple years we talked about this. I've always kind of said I think Maryland Maryland and Rutgers were always kind of my dark horses because I feel like Maryland is that kind of sneaky school that just catches up on you. Now Rutgers, not as worried about Rutgers this year. They're 11-10 overall. They're 4-6 in the Big Ten right now. But Maryland, Maryland might be coming for the top of the Big Ten at least. They're gonna make it
Well,
interesting.
the Terps, since the beginning, January 2nd of 25, the start of this calendar year, they started on the West Coast. They were in Seattle. They lost a 6-point game to the Huskies. Then they went to Eugene and lost by 4 to Oregon. At that point, it was number 9 Oregon. And from that point, when they dropped those 2 in a row, they have won 6 of 7. And the one loss came at a 2-point loss in overtime to Northwestern at the Welsh Ryan Arena there in Evanston. Yeah, they played Sunday against IU in Assembly Hall. They were up by double digits kind of late in that game, gave up the lead, and were actually behind and needed a late 3 to take the lead. Now, there was I didn't watch the game personally, but I did see the highlights. Maybe the Maryland ball handler traveled in the paint before kicking it out for the 3. Maybe he did, but you know what? At the same time, you had a foul to give, and if he's in the paint, you foul him.
Yeah.
You foul him and reset and make it to where Maryland's now got to enter the ball into play, and maybe you don't get that wide open look. But so maybe they should have lost to IU, but you know what? They didn't, and then they went and beat Wisconsin, who I've talked to Mike DeCourcy. He says, Maryland, or I think Wisconsin's going to stick around. And it's not that they're necessarily one of the best teams in the Big Ten or the favorite to win the Big Ten, but it's one of those that they're just kind of working their way. They're just kind of they're winning games, and they're staying right near the top. And Maryland beat them. I think you're right. I think Maryland's going to stay. I've really liked Kevin Willard since he was at Seton Hall before he came to Maryland, and I really liked him as a coach there with the Pirates. And I really thought this was a big hire and a good hire for Maryland. And last year was a little bit of a bummer, compared to what he did in year one. But it looks like he's gotten the Terps back on pace.
Yeah, I agree, and I feel and you could probably make that same argument for Wisconsin too, because if you look at historically with Wisconsin has always been in contention with the Big Ten. Like you said, they may not necessarily be the odds-on favorite to win it, and I believe there's been a couple times they've even split the Big Ten as co-champions before. But Wisconsin is almost always one of those teams that I feel like they're kind of like a Maryland. They're really good. It's hard to go up there and play. They're a well-coached team as far as when you go up to face them and whatnot. And they usually make a pretty deep run, at least in the Big Ten tournament. Now, when it comes to the actual, NCAA tournament, a little bit different. But at least in the Big Ten, Wisconsin, completely turns it around and makes a pretty big statement. But no, I agree. I like what Kevin Willard has been able to do with Maryland so far. And like you said, even though they kept it close against IU, they still found a way to win, which at the end of the day, that's pretty much all you can do. And it is kind of funny too, because you do have to kind of feel a little bit bad for Maryland, because they're the ones that have given the Washington Huskies their only win in conference in the Big Ten, sitting there at 1-8. Nebraska, just above them, technically sitting at 3-7 with a big upset win over Illinois, who was also ranked, which, kind of surprising with Illinois that they, again, not necessarily bad, but it always feels like Illinois, they start to kind of be on the up and up, on the upswing, and then they start to kind of come down a little bit. It's like people start to figure them out. They're not prepared for it, and the next thing you know, they're coming back down to earth.
Well, and that's the crazy thing is we're talking about an Illinois team that beat Oregon on January 2nd, by 32 points. At that time, Oregon was ranked number 9. It was the worst home loss by a top 10 team in the history of college basketball.
Yep.
Then they come home and they thump Penn State by 39. And then 3 days later they lose to USC at home. Then they go to Assembly Hall and they beat IU by 25. Then they go to the Breslin and lose by 2. And then they go and host Maryland and they get beat by 21 at home to Maryland. Now, we're just talking about Maryland. They're better than what we maybe anticipated, but still that shouldn't be that bad of a loss.
Right.
Then they host Northwestern, their rival, so to speak. They beat them by 9, and then they drop one in overtime to Nebraska
by 6, which again is great, and it's weird too, because I'm not gonna lie, and I feel bad because I can't remember his name. The kid that was on Nebraska last year that was just an absolute star.
Keisei Tominaga?
Yes. It's like, man, just think if he had this team around him when he did it. Would Nebraska be in a potentially totally different spot than what they are right now? Again, all credit to them. They were able to beat the number 18 team in the country right now. But nonetheless, though, Nebraska basketball isn't exactly what we're pieing over on most Big Ten basketball games.
And the thing with in Illinois, and at the time they played number 1 Tennessee in December, they lost by 2 points. Like they're not playing. They can play with anybody. They've got the talent to beat just about anybody and play definitely with anybody they go on the court against. But it just seems like last year's team was one that the pieces that needed to meshed, and I've already talked about this a little bit, was, last year, 2 years ago, Brad Underwood was talking about the team still gelling after they'd gotten beat in the Big Ten tournament. Well, last year, they gelled really well and played all the way to an Elite Eight. Terrence Shannon Jr., Luke Goody, all of those guys, get to an Elite Eight. This year almost feels like they're the team from 2 years ago where they can play really well, but then they're going to lay an egg. It really does seem like they're all over the place when it comes to trying to get consistency, because you're just not seeing consistency out of them at all.
Yeah, and the bad part too is, and you can tell me your thoughts on this. Their schedule is going to mirror how their season goes too, as far as they're going to be hot and they're going to be cold. They lose in Lincoln. Now their next 4, they have Ohio State, they host them, then they go to Rutgers, they go to Minnesota,
don't
they host
count that
UCLA.
as an automatic win either.
No, I say Rutgers. Rutgers is a pain. Minnesota, up until getting beat by Michigan State just the other day, they were on a 3-game win streak in the Big Ten.
With 2 ranked teams being in there.
Yeah. And then obviously UCLA, like you pointed out, that was at one point going to be one of the favorite teams to potentially, be in contention for the Big Ten. And then after that, holy moly, you have to host Michigan State, so you get round 2 against them. Then you have to go to Wisconsin, and then you have to host Duke.
At Duke, it says Madison Square Garden, so technically it's an I guess, but it's at Madison Square Garden.
Right. And then you end the season having to face Purdue, and then you have Michigan and Iowa in between there. So you're, again, like you said, there's no automatic wins, because honestly, I mean, we've seen Ohio State upset Purdue. We've seen Rutgers do upsets. We've seen Minnesota. So, I mean, anything is really possible for the Illini right now.
Yeah.
But
they are an interesting team, because I think they have an incredible upside. But it looks like they could lose to just about anybody as well.
Yes, 100%.
So, okay, let's take a quick break for the audio podcast. We'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about the hoop season, and then I think we're going to have enough time to jump on to the topic pertaining to the worldwide leader in sports, I guess, wanting to throw some money at a conference, I guess. But we'll be right back after these messages. You're listening to Big Talk on the Believe and Lounge Sports Network. Okay, we are back. How quick was that, Tony?
It's so fast. It's kind of like summer break. You're like, oh wow, I blinked and it's already over. Now I have to go back. Dang it.
We're talking some Big Ten basketball. Michigan State. We talked about them a little bit. They've got some games coming up against some ranked opponents, including Oregon, Illinois, Purdue, then Wisconsin. Not to say they can't trip up anywhere else, but those are a lot of games that can really maybe jump up and grab them. The team I wanted to talk about a little bit before we wrap up our Big Ten talk, it's Rutgers. I am so kind of thrown off by Rutgers because they were looked at as one of those teams that could definitely do something with surprising some people this year, and not necessarily winning. That's not at all what I'm getting at, but being a contender in that top third of the Big Ten. But they have two of the top 9 freshman class come in, Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper.
Yeah.
They've been everything you could imagine, Tony. I mean,
I say Ace Bailey
averaging 20.7
Is they have 37 points against Northwestern.
Yeah, and Dylan Harper averaging 18.5 points. So like they're coming in and they're doing what they were advertised. But then after that, the next highest scorer is Jordan Dierkick, and he's averaging 7.4.
Right.
And so I think if I'm Steve Peichel, I'm kind of frustrated because we've got these. It's going to be no shock that probably both of these players are not going to be in Piscataway next season. They're going to be in the NBA draft, and it almost feels like maybe they're wasting a potential season where they could really make some noise in the Big Ten.
Yeah, and who knows too? I mean, they very easily could go in the NBA draft, or especially with NIL and the fact of even basketball players can take advantage of the transfer portal and get paid and make money and whatnot. Yeah. They could go to another contender, and it doesn't necessarily have to even be in the Big Ten. I mean, you look at some of these bigger basketball schools with big money alumni. I mean, they could go to Duke, they could go to Kansas, they could go to UConn. If they wanted to stay in the Big Ten as far as competing for a championship, they could go to Michigan State, they could go to Purdue. Like they would have a ton of options that they could go with to be extremely successful. But it is really a surprise because that kind of shows you, even with 2 massive stars on your team, if you don't have any other depth or any other realistically supporting cast, if this doesn't show everybody that basketball really is a team sport, you could have 2 great freshmen, one drop almost 40 points and you win. It's like, wow, that's and you only win by 7. That's the other crazy part. Like he drops 40 points, he drops almost half of your total points scored, and you still only win by 7. That shows a lot to the overall team depth that's there in Piscataway too.
Bailey and Harper averaging 39.3 points a game. That's of the 39.3, and they're averaging as a team 76.6 points per game. So those two, excuse me, are really putting together a really good season, considering. If you're talking about individual accolades and stats, but it's just not correlating on the court into W's like it was anticipated that it would turn into be. And it just Steve Peichel's a really a good guy. I mean, I've talked to him a couple of different times, and he seems very genuine. I mean, I don't know him, but I've talked to him a couple of times, and he seems genuine. He seems to really be doing things the right way, and it just is unfortunate that he's not getting the production from the rest of the team as he was hoping. And to kind of talk about when it comes to NIL money, I think they're making plenty of money. They're in the New Jersey market, so that's New York City, They've got a good market that they're in. So if money is their thing, they're there. They're not going to transfer. I don't know that they'll transfer into the portal to go somewhere to win. I think if they're going to go somewhere that's not Rutgers next year, it's not going to be in college basketball. I think they'll be in the NBA.
Right. But I mean, you never know too, because I mean, you have to look at the NBA, because a lot of these guys, even if they're drafted, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be on a spot. And if you're only on a
Right.
G League roster, you're not making a whole lot of money. So for some of them, it might be more beneficial if you do stay. You could potentially kill two birds, one stone. You can either make more money and compete, or maybe if you even take a little bit of a pay cut but compete for a championship, at least boost your draft stock to make sure that you have better chance of at least securing a for sure, roster spot on a team when you get drafted.
I've seen the prognostications of where these two would fall, and they're both in the lottery. So I'm guessing that there's not going to be much improvement of their stock if they continue on the same trajectory that they've been doing thus far this year. Because right now, and just as much as I do, is when it comes to the NBA, they're looking for what you can do within your team, but they're still looking at what you're doing as an individual.
Right.
Your overall record doesn't matter as long as you're putting up the points and being successful, and not being a pariah on the team. You can, that's what they're drafting you for. And the prognostication, like I said, they're both, I think, maybe even in the top 7, like that. So they're, I don't know that they're going to improve much on their draft stock going forward if they were to, come back next year. You can't get much higher. I mean, you can a little bit, but not much.
Right. Hey, it doesn't hurt though.
Nope, not at all. So we've got a few minutes here, 5 minutes, Tony. We've got 5 minutes. Let's talk about your the topic you brought to me right before we hit record and broadcast today. The worldwide leader in sports, ESPN, is trying to extend a conference.
Yeah, so we've talked about this a lot in the past, as far as the ACC having the media rights to all of the ESPN has all of the ACC media rights for all of the schools that are wrapped up in that, including the big names of Florida State, Clemson, Miami, North Carolina. Well, we'd always heard that they own the rights to their contracts through 2036. Well, yes and no. That it's been clarified a little bit that the network had until February 1st to pick up the option of the deal. And had they not, the deal actually would have ended after the 2027 season. But since they decided to pick it up, they technically own the rights through 2036. Now, the most interesting part about this, and Sam and I kind of talked about it a little bit, because obviously as the Big Ten has continued to expand and whatnot, and the Big Ten has equally said that they're always looking to expand, and they would definitely like to expand into SEC country primarily, and new states, that there is talks of a new unfair and unequal media deal that basically Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, and Miami would receive significantly more money out of that media deal as compared to the other ACC schools, to which I think Sam and I both agree. I don't see many of those schools taking that deal, because let's be realistic. If I'm any of these conferences, whether I'm, the Big 12, the Big 10, or the SEC, probably more the Big 10 and the Big 12, hey, we'll give equal share money, more than what you're making right now. And you don't have to split it. You don't have to, share with Florida State, Clemson, Miami, North Carolina. And honestly, I think some of those schools would probably take it if given the opportunity. Now, again, there'd be a lot of questions as far as quality of the teams that would be coming in. And obviously the Big Ten primarily looks if you're AAU certified or not, as far as an education standpoint goes. But nonetheless, it would be interesting to see how this continues to go over the next few months and even the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Because obviously Florida State's still in a legal battle with it. They've spent over $3 million just looking at it. But what's your thoughts on it? Because I mean, we've already said we think the ACC is probably going to be the next conference to go.
I think that's what this is it's a last ditch effort to try to keep all of the teams that matter still in the conference.
Right.
Do I think that some of those teams that would be getting an unfair smaller portion would still vote for it? Yes, I think so, because they do know where their bread is buttered. I think Florida State, Clemson, Miami, and I guess to an extent North Carolina, but definitely those big three. When it comes to that, bring in a lot of revenue. But at the same time, I still think there's only one team that's really a needle mover in all of college football that's available to join a conference, and that's Notre Dame. That's not even. It's not even an ACC team. So, do I think that this? I think it's a last ditch effort to try to keep the entire ACC from falling apart, because I think it's a matter of time before teams are getting out of that buyout. I really do think that would be definitely is gonna they're gonna just, the money's gonna be so much that buyout, even if it's an absorbent amount, isn't really gonna be that big of a deal to them.
No, and it would be interesting too, because when you just kind of look at the ACC school names that just pop up off the top of my head, I definitely see Stanford and Cal going back to the Pac-12 if the ACC splits. I think, Pitt, Louisville, they probably go to the Big 12, which honestly that would be interesting and a pretty good fit. You could probably even make the argument that NC State might even end up going there. Wake Forest, I don't know about Wake Forest, to be honest with you, or Boston College. Maybe the Big 12. Maybe they have to shrink back down to the group of 5. Who knows? But no, it will be interesting because, like we talked about in the past too, at least Florida State and Clemson, the SEC has said that they're not interested because they already have a footprint in both South Carolina and Florida both. So for them, what do you really add? And especially with Clemson's not the big powerhouse that it was in the ACC anymore. And then after the display last year, Florida State has a ton of work that they have to do, and you wouldn't be really getting a whole lot of good quality coming in from that either. Now the Big Ten might, because like you said, it would be new states, it would be different, but obviously, how much ruckus would these teams make if they feel that they're getting the short end of the stick on a deal?
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Like you said, in the next, even couple of years, it could take to where this fleshes its way out and becomes very apparent of what's going on, because it may be one of those that those ACC teams are waiting for 2027, and they go, no, it doesn't. We should have an ability to get
renegotiate
out of that
or
deal,
get out
or
of it.
renegotiate, void the deal or whatever. And then all of a sudden it's a free for all on those ACC teams coming out. But it'll be interesting to see how that plays out going forward, because it will have ramifications, or at least the butterfly effect onto the Big Ten.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of today's Friday episode, Tony. Why don't you go ahead and tell everybody where they can find us?
You can find us on Facebook at Big Talk. That's B1G Talk. Big Talk with a 1 instead of an I. You can also find us on Instagram, X, and TikToks at B1G_Talk. Big Talk with a 1 and an underscore. You can find us usually 3 times a week on the All Sports All Plays Network, depending on if we're sick or if we have anything crazy going on. Most of the time, 3 times a week. And you had best believe you can find us on the Believe Podcast Network, as well as the Lounge Sports Network, which is umbrellaed under the Lounge Media Group, all hosted and monitored by Sam, who was nice enough to post the podcast and this episode wherever you get your podcast at best.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of the show, Tony. It's going to be an exciting weekend. Lots of good basketball coming on to watch, and some other Pro Bowl activities, I guess, if you want to watch some flag football and stuff.
Right.
It's certainly more interesting than guys in pads that don't touch each other.
Right. Yeah.
At least they have flags and they can pull the flags. But yeah. So for Tony Hollinsworth, I'm Sam Sprunger. Thanks for coming in. We'll see you next week.